Ever since I started YouTube, people have been asking me to talk about this show, which I really haven't done much of. But now you're finally getting it. An entire video dedicated to Batman the Brave and the Bold. You can thank our friend JJ Hatter for this actually, as he recently did a top 12 list of the show's greatest villains. I've left a link to that list in the description. Inspired by him, I figured I'd make my own list. Of course, as you can see, mine is just a meager top 5. It wasn't very easy to make either, considering the fact a ton of villains appeared on the show. We probably got more villains on this show than we've ever gotten on any other DC cartoon, due to its premise being really more of a DC show starring Batman, as opposed to just a straight up Batman show. We also got rogues from all over the DC universe, not just knaves from Gotham City. The show is also of course famous for featuring many obscure rogues, most of these appearing mainly in cameos. However, while it was great to see so many DC Comics villains in glorious animation, most of them were fairly one-dimensional. They were nowhere near as complex or layered as the ones on Batman the Animated Series. Instead, they were just simple bad guys up to no good. So with this show, it's really more of a case, which villains do you find most entertaining? And most of them were very entertaining. Of course, as always, this list is just my personal opinion. Write down your own list in the comments. And without further ado, here we go. Number 5. The Music Meister. Here's a character a ton of people have wanted me to cover for ages now. Well, here he finally is. So besides featuring many Bat rogues and other DC rogues, the show also created a few villains of its own. Music Meister here, voiced by Neil Patrick Harris, is one such villain. This character has actually become a bit of a fan favorite, and following the show he's gone on to appear in other places as well. On the show though, he only got one single episode, Mayhem of the Music Meister. So the Music Meister is a villain with the power to hypnotize people with song. Anybody who hears his singing will fall under his command and start singing and dancing themselves. The Meister uses his uncanny ability to have others commit crimes for him. So it's basically mind control but with song and dance added to it. There's lots of mind control villains out there, but few are as entertaining as the Music Meister. He puts a unique spin on a concept, and seeing these otherwise serious and straight-faced characters break out into song and dance numbers is quite the sight. His episode is essentially a musical, but unlike traditional musicals where the characters suddenly sing and dance for no reason like they're insane, here it does actually make sense. Well, for the most part. It's a gimmick that works. The Meister also gets an origin story, albeit a brief one, but it was fairly rare that the rogues on the show got any kind of origin at all. It is a pathetic origin too. As a kid, the Meister was bullied and mocked by his peers because he sang in a choir. When his powers then developed, he used them to strike back at his bullies. And that's probably what still drives him to this day, strike back at the world that he feels is mocking him. Another interesting aspect is that the Meister falls in love with Black Canary when he hears her sing. She's another character with a powerful voice, so it's just perfect. Come to think of it, it would have been a huge missed opportunity if this hadn't happened. A minor complaint I have is that the Meister changes his costume numerous times, and I do wish that he kept the first one he wears. But it does kinda work, as each costume is themed after a different music genre, so it's not really a case like Calendar Man where he goes from one stupid costume to another stupid one. Number 4. Gentleman Ghost. Voiced by Greg Ellis, the Gentleman Ghost was a perfect villain for the show. He's a Hawkman villain, but he has fought Batman a few times in the comics too. There's 2 classic Batman vs. Ghost stories from the late 70s, and considering this show is one giant love letter to the Silver and Bronze Age of comics, well, like I said, he was perfect for the show. The Ghost appeared quite a lot on the show too. He got 2 episodes all his own and was featured in the opening teaser of another one. However, all of these 3 appearances took place in season 1. In the following 2 seasons, the Ghost only appeared in cameos for some reason. Also, he never once faced Hawkman. Did Hawkman even appear on the show? I honestly can't remember. So yeah, season 1 was the big Gentleman Ghost season. One of his 2 episodes was even dedicated entirely to his origin. I'm not sure if any other villain got such special treatment. Like I said, most of them didn't get an origin at all. Anyway, his origin on the show is a bit different from the comics. He's still Gentleman Jim Craddock, a notorious highwayman in 1800s England. However, here he makes a deal with the demon Astaroth to gain eternal life. In order to fulfill this deal, Craddock must hunt down innocent people on the grimy streets of London and steal their souls, delivering them to Astaroth. In the end, he does get his eternal life, but it kinda backfires, as after he's caught, he's hanged. He does indeed die, but still exists for all eternity as a ghost. You should never trust a demon. This version of the character is actually a bit darker than what we normally get in the the comics. He's more sinister and demonic here, summoning ghouls and spooks to his side, plotting to wipe out the living. While in the comics, the ghost is more of a quaint gentleman thief, heisting valuable trinkets. I like the comics version more, but this one is good too. The character owes a lot to the show as well, as before it, many hadn't even heard of him. The Brave and the Bold made many people into Gentleman Ghost fans. The show added a few cool concepts too, like his magical cane, his ghostly skeleton horse, and a weakness against ninth metal. Whenever the ghost comes into contact with ninth metal, his true appearance, that of a rotting corpse, briefly reveals itself. It's a pretty neat and freaky visual. Number 3. Babyface. Here's another villain created for the show, although Babyface still feels very familiar. He's like something straight out of a Dick Tracy strip, and I suspect that he probably was created as an homage to Dick Tracy villains. He's also a spoof of classic movie gangsters, and his voice, provided by Tom Kenny, is a parody of Edward G. Robinson's. The character only got one episode that was all his own, but he did appear in a couple of other notable roles too, including a teaser opening. So as you may have guessed, Babyface, real name Alfonso Vincenzo Giuseppe Face, is a gangster. Public Enemy 342 for some reason. He's a full-grown man with a beefy body, but the head of a small infant. Top that off with the voice, and you've got one hilarious character. Babyface is in my opinion the funniest villain on the entire show. Me being a big fan of old classic gangster movies, I just can't get enough of this guy. This is just the type of villain I love. Babyface also has a girlfriend who is his main partner in crime, Mrs. Manface. Yeah. And don't be fooled, that is actually a woman. Babyface loves Mrs. Manface deeply, and will react very violently at anyone either mocking or manhandling her. It's quite touching actually, and very weird. This bizarre relationship just adds to the craziness of the character. Babyface and Mrs. Manface are just plain hysterical. I'm not really sure what else to say, we don't really know much about the character anyway. He didn't get any kind of origin story, but he doesn't really need one. All we need to know is that he's a tough guy gangster with a baby head who loves a really ugly dame. The crowning achievement of the Brave and the Bold. Yeah, see? We're gonna pull a job, see? Number 2. Twoface. Yeah, you knew Harvey would be on here somewhere. I actually wanted to put him as my number 1, but the thing is, he doesn't really appear that much on the show. He shows up in several cameos, but only has 2 notable appearances. The Mask of Matches Malone, an episode I recently talked about, and the opening teaser for the Fate of Equinox episode. Both of these appearances are pretty great though, especially the opening. In the opening, Harvey's coin lands on the good side, so he teams up with Batman and fights his own gang. I often complain that everybody seems to forget that Twoface is supposed to be half good too. Well, this show is one that remembered it. I love the visual design they went with too. It's a classic green scarred purple and orange suited look from the pre-crisis era. You know I love that one. It's specifically based on Dick Sprang's design for the character, which many of the characters were. The Brave and the Bold portrayed Harvey in a more light-hearted way than the animated series did, but it still did him really well. Just like Babyface, he was pretty much depicted as an old school gangster, but of course with the coin gimmick and a split personality. I wish he had appeared more on the show. The opening teaser for the Fate of Equinox actually could have been made into an entire episode instead. After all, Batman teaming up with one of his villains is far more interesting than him teaming up with another hero. Real shame they didn't do that. That episode definitely would have been high on my top 5 Two-Face cartoons list. The character was voiced by James Remar for most of the series, while good old Richard Mole from the animated series filled in for one small cameo. And now, the greatest Brave and the Bold villain. Number 1, the Joker. Yeah, I don't know if this is a surprise or very predictable. The Joker was going to be on the list somewhere though, you knew that. Of course, if Harv had been featured more, he would have gotten the top spot. So lucky for the Clown Prince, I guess. I think it would be pretty hard pressed to find someone who doesn't like Joker on this show. The only ones I can imagine are people who only want a modern, gritty, anarchist version of the character. This Joker is certainly not that. The Brave and the Bold gave us a classic Joker, straight out of the Silver and Bronze Age comics. His look is also based on a Dick Sprang design from the 40s and 50s, and just like Two-Face, he looks absolutely fabulous. Unlike Two-Face though, the Joker appeared a lot on the show, and I mean a lot. He was in fact the show's most recurring rogue. I guess that goes for most Batman shows. Seeing this particular version of the Ace of Knaves so frequently was not a displeasure though. Just like in those old comics, this Joker is a zany clown, a prince of jest Masters, a king of comedic capers. It really is like the old classic Joker ripped straight off the page of a comic book, even more so than Mark Hamill's animated series Joker. Jeff Bennett also provides the character with a perfect Joker voice. More so than with any other villain on the show, we also get tons of references to the comics. Look at that in the middle, only angels have wings. My second favorite Joker comic. There was lots of this sprinkled throughout the show, and as a big comic fan who's actually read all those stories, seeing these homages is simply fantastic. Despite giving us a more light-hearted Joker than most versions do today, we did still get that crazy obsession with Batman. In fact, this show also implied that Batman was obsessed with the Joker too. The two locked in combat for all eternity. Best friends in a bizarre way. Joker's weird Batman love is certainly a crucial piece to the puzzle, and the Brave and the Bold did not neglect that. All in all, this version of the character is one of the greatest Jokers out there. Without a doubt, my second favorite animated Joker, after the animated series one. So there you have it, my top 5 Brave and the Bold villains. Tell me yours in the comments. Now, considering there were so many rogues on the show, here are a few that almost made my list. Catwoman, Black Mask, Gorilla Grodd, Crazy Quilt, and the Clock King. I also really like the Scarecrow, despite the fact he made very few appearances, sadly enough. Anyway, as always, remember Arkham Asylum awaits you in the next video.